Welcome back. It's the Jungle Sports Stories with Miss Walker, and in this series about the WBL, we're going to cover a brief history of the Forgotten League and each of its 3 seasons, as well as highlight some of the more notable players that never got the recognition they deserved. We'll also talk about the conditions the women of the WBL had to play in, starting with this video that focuses on how difficult traveling was back in the day. If you've been following the WNBA, you know there's some controversy surrounding the ladies' travel options. The issue being that chartered flights for a full season are not on the table, which means the players are taking commercial flights just like you and me. Now, some may say these ladies should be grateful they're able to board flights to their games because their predecessors had it much worse. But isn't that what's supposed to happen? The pioneers have it hard, so generations after have it easier, right? Let me paint the picture for you. Let's take a trip back to 1978. Jimmy Carter is in the White House. Donna Summer's last dance is burning up the discotheques. Ground beef was $1.18 a pound. Porterhouses were $2.98 a pound. The Pittsburgh Steelers were on a mission to defeat the reigning Super Bowl champs, the Dallas Cowboys. And the Seattle Supersonics were on their way to winning the NBA championship. It was a big year for women too. 1978 saw them integrated into the regular army, and the very first women's professional basketball league would hold a draft that July. The WBL had finally arrived, but it was messy. Now, keep in mind, it's 1978. There are no cell phones. The internet is not a thing, and neither is streaming. You'd better be in front of a TV at the specified time of a show or game, otherwise you missed it and would pray for a rerun to show up somewhere, because after 1 in the morning, the channels disappeared. And let's be clear, there's no Uber, there's no Lyft, no ride-sharing services exist. If you want to get around the country, you take a taxi, bus, or a plane. Now guess which option the WBL used to cross state lines. If you guess planes, you're wrong. Buses were the main mode of transportation. The Iowa Hornets had the most recognizable and one of the newer buses in the league. That's because their owner, George Neeson, made a small fortune on a little invention known as the modern-day trampoline. Trampoline parks opened across the country, and sporting facilities implemented them as an exercise tool. This afforded the Hornets a plushier lifestyle on the road than other teams. In their corn dog bus, a 1964 Greyhound, they were easily spotted by the bright green and gold colors. Once they pulled into town, everyone knew the team was there. The bus was tricked out for its day too. It had an 8-track stereo, carpet from the floor to the ceiling, beds, bathrooms, a dining area, TVs, and VCRs. This was a sharp contrast to the old rickety bus the Dallas Diamonds had. Their bus broke down after a game, and a good Samaritan driving the car behind them shuttled them to a nearby hotel. The Chicago Hustles bus gave out on the way to an exhibition game, and the ladies had to carpool with people at the closest gas station. Many of the coaches doubled as drivers and would pull over after games to get a nap in before continuing on the road. Getting lost was commonplace, and teams would find themselves circling cities and highways for hours until they found a gym. There was no plugging in an address into a GPS to get where you were going. Then there's Mother Nature, and she's typically undefeated. You see, harsh winters plagued the Midwest and northern parts of the country, and the winter of 1978-79 was especially severe. Cities like Chicago and Milwaukee were seeing record lows as the temperature dropped and the snow grew higher. Iowa was having a rough time too. These are the conditions the Hornets found themselves in, leaving a game in Cedar Falls for another game in Des Moines against the Minnesota Phillies. The distance between the two cities is around 129 miles, which takes a little over 2 hours to travel under normal weather conditions. But snowdrifts were as high as the bus's window, while they crept at a snail's pace behind a snowplow all the way to Veterans Memorial Auditorium. When they finally arrived, 6 hours later, the Hornets scurried to throw on their uniforms, which they planned to wash before the game, but since it was already 10 minutes past tip-off, they decided to just throw them on and hit the court. But the joke was on them, because when they pulled out their uniforms, they were frozen stiff from their sweat. After keeping the Phillies waiting for an hour as they waited for their icy jerseys to melt, they decided to hell with it and air-dried the half-thawed and soaked uniforms by running up and down the court with them on during the game. Sometimes the Hornets would arrive at venues so late they missed their practice time. This was the case when they attempted to show up early for a game against the New Jersey Gems and pounded on a gym door in my hometown of Elizabeth, New Jersey, to get in. When the doors opened, there was a locals girl game taking place, so much for practice. The two determining factors for how a team would travel to a game were funds and geography. For instance, the St. Louis Streaks flew to their away games because of their location. But while that was easier on their bodies, it wasn't easy on their wallets. So they would look for money savers, and one was to book flights with layovers in Atlanta because they were cheaper. Other teams would fly standby in an effort to save money. Now, can you imagine seeing a professional sports team waiting on standby as you board the plane? It was unheard of. Something else you'll never hear a professional sports team do is use hitchhiking as a regular mode of transport. Genia Beasley of the Nebraska Wranglers recalls one hitchhiking incident where she rode in the back of an electrical truck on the way to a game at the New Orleans Superdome. Now, some will say, what did these ladies expect from a startup league with little money? Well, they at least expected the same, if not better level of travel accommodation than they had in college. That's right, many of the ladies came from schools with excellent sports programs. Faye Lawrence of the Philadelphia Foxes attended Temple University and immediately noticed the difference. Temple's team would arrive a day before an away game, giving their athletes time to rest, whereas the WBL traveled the same day of the game. She felt she was spoiled in college, but definitely not in the professional league. Other notable differences were the weight rooms and training facilities players had access to in college. These luxuries were absent from the WBL. Many of the women understood the league was establishing itself and knew the ride wouldn't be glamorous, but the constant travel and play began to take a toll on their bodies. This was another big issue because when money got low, trainers were one of the first to go. That was extremely problematic. See, at the time, the American Journal of Sports Medicine released a report that concluded women were 5 times as likely to get a sprain, usually in the ankle, and twice as likely to suffer a contusion. If the women had proper training facilities, conditioning would have been better and incidence of sprains lower. And if scheduling took into account the poor travel accommodations, players would have time to rest and heal. But that wouldn't be the case. They were still traveling through the night to city after city, often wrapping and taping themselves up before the next game. The ladies of the WBL tried to roll with the punches for as long as they could, but eventually began speaking out, just as the players of the WNBA are doing now. So, what were some of the money issues that caused the WBL to implode? We'll get into that soon,